Rural electric cooperatives supply rural Missouri's electric energy needs. Some changes are coming that could raise the cost for farmers and homeowners. We'll take a look next on Show Me Ag. Welcome to Show Me Ag. I'm your host, Kyle Vickers. Thanks for joining us. Rural electric cooperatives have a long history supplying power to farmers and homeowners at reasonable prices. They brought power to rural Missouri back in the 30s and have continued to be a reliable source of electricity for folks in some pretty remote areas, unserved by other utilities. But recent proposals by the Environmental Protection Agency have created some potential headaches for the cooperatives and their customers. We have with us Barry Hart, Executive Vice President of the Association of Missouri Electric Cooperatives, to give us some background and an update. Mr. Hart, thank you for joining us. I remember my parents, I'm of a generation that it was my parents remembered when electricity first came to their homes and their farms and what a change that made. Let's talk a little bit about the history and how it is that rural cooperatives supply most of the electricity out in rural Missouri.
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Kyle. That history is really important, how the rural electric cooperative system developed in the state, but also the hardworking pioneers that actually made the decision to start electrification in the rural areas. I've heard from my parents too. They remember when the lights came on in the farms, and also I go to a lot of electric cooperative annual meetings, and you'd be surprised how many people in the audience still remember the day the lights came on. It's probably one of the greatest achievements in the history of the U.S. 90% of the rural areas of this country had no electricity back in the 30s, and times were really hard. Farming was really hard. You had to pump water by hand, and you had no lights in the house and no air conditioning, no computers, those kind of things we enjoy today. But these pioneers decided they were going to take it on their own hands and do something about it. The impetus to the whole program was FDR established the Rural Electrification Administration back in the 30s. And his vision was that everybody in rural America could have electricity, but they could also afford it. And we still, today, 77 years later, we still live by those principles, that folks in rural Missouri could afford electric power and it'd be available to everybody. Missouri's a really interesting story. People had to go out and sign their friends and neighbors up. They had to get so many people signed up before they could get a loan from REA to bring the first power lines to their areas. And all they had to do was pay $5 and join the co-op. Well, $5 in the 30s was a lot of money.
A week's wages.
Yes, it was. And but they got people signed up. They went door to door. They started doing these loans, and a lot of experts in the industry at the time from the cities said these farmers are never going to be able to pull this off. They don't know what they're doing. They've never built lines before. They don't know how to run a system. And these early pioneers said, we're going to show you. And in Missouri, they showed them. 77 years later, here we have about 1.5 million people in the state of Missouri that get power from electric co-ops. The generating co-op, Associated Electric Co-op, that supplies all the electricity in the state, they are a AA bond rated utility, which a lot of utilities in this country can't say that. They're financially strong. They're serving some of the most remote areas in the country, and but they proved everybody wrong over the years.
Let's go back and talk a little bit about the cooperative issue. It's not a privately owned, investor-funded utility service like most of the ones in urban areas are. Tell us a little bit about how the cooperative system works. You already mentioned you had to pay a membership fee to hope to get electricity.
Yeah, that membership fee made you a member of the cooperative. And the deal at the time was that if you wanted to apply for one of these REA loans, they called them, you had to be a not-for-profit cooperative. And you had to adhere to a set of cooperative principles. And those cooperative principles really is the foundation of why we're so strong in the state now. You have to have democratic control. And what that means is the consumers that get electricity from the co-op, they have to elect fellow consumers to sit on a board to set rates and set policies that the co-op is guided by. And that ensures that they have ownership. And but it also ensures that the electric co-op meets the needs of the people that are served the electricity that actually own it. So That principle was a key. Another principle that FDR had was that these folks would be able to afford electricity. And even today, if you look at the salaries of rural Missourians, we're way below the national average. And our membership in the state, these 1.5 million people, 33% of these folks are over 65 years of age, and 80% of those folks are on a fixed income. So this affordability issue is really a hard driver for us. If we're going to represent these rural folks in Missouri that own their co-op, we have to make the electricity affordable. So that drives our decision making.
We really, on our farm, take it for granted. I think a lot of people do. We have fans that run on our bins. We have electric lights in various buildings, even our fence chargers and so on. We really have learned to take electricity for granted.
These pioneers, they had it figured out. They also, some of the other principles, a key one was concern for community. They knew that if they brought electricity to the countryside, it was going to improve quality of life. And the communities that these folks did business in would have to benefit also from the power. And they wanted their electric co-op plugged in to improving quality of life. And that's another driver that's really helped the co-ops and helped their communities over the years too.
So you mentioned this earlier, but Associated Electric Cooperatives is a supplier. Can you explain how the power is supplied to Missouri?
Yeah, once they started signing members up back in the 30s and 40s, and they started building these lines, and a lot of times the lines, well, actually most of the lines in the early days were built by hand. They dug the holes by hand. They set the poles by hand. They strung the wire by hand.
My grandfather had that job. He liked to talk about that.
And those farmers helped too. You know, they helped string wire. But as they were building these distribution retail cooperatives, in the early days they bought power from the other suppliers. And it got to a point where there were enough members in the state that they decided they would like to have their own cooperative generate the power and transmit it to their co-op areas. And so 6 generation and transmission cooperatives were formed in the state of Missouri. One in northeast Missouri, northwest, central, southwest, south central, and southeast Missouri. So there were 6 G&Ts, we call them, generating and transmission cooperatives. The local co-op members owned those generating and transmission cooperatives too. So they made decisions on power supply that would also serve the best interests of the local farmers. In the 50s, electricity demand became so great as more and more people were using electricity and using the benefits of the power. The 6 G&T cooperatives decided that to get economies of scale and build larger power generation units, they needed to form one super co-op. And that co-op is what we call a G co-op, which is Associated Electric Cooperative.
Okay, so where's our electricity coming from now?
Now, well, in the early days, they got a lot of hydropower out of the federal hydropower system, which is still, we get a lot of hydropower today under these contracts we have with the federal government, and it's clean energy, but it's also low cost. So that was a key component in the early days. Then they decided to start building diesel generating units, and as demands increased and cost of diesel fuel got higher, they decided that there had to be other ways to build larger generating plants, and they found out the larger generating plants ran very efficiently with the use of coal. So they had hydro on the system, they had a little bit of diesel, now they were moving into coal in the 60s. Demands kept increasing in the state, and it got to the point where they needed to build large generating plants, and they built those in the 80s. In the 1980s, if you remember, we had the Arab oil embargo. The U.S. Congress passed a bill that said you could not generate electricity with natural gas because there was a shortage of natural gas at the time. There was a nuclear accident in the United States, 3 Mile Island, and the federal government put a moratorium on building nuclear plants. So the electric co-ops had to build a large generating unit, but they couldn't use gas or nuclear. So the only option at that point was coal. And it's very ironic that in those days our federal government was promoting the use of coal for electricity generation because it was a U.S. resource. We didn't have to go to Arabia to get it. And there was plenty supply of it. So that's the direction the co-ops went. And over the years, we've developed this coal fleet of power plants that are very low cost. In the 1990s, they passed amendments to the Clean Air Act that required decreases in sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide and mercury pollutants out of these coal plants. So the electric co-ops in Missouri borrowed $1.4 billion to install, with a B, to install all the pollution control equipment on our existing fleet. Our co-op members in Missouri supported that because they knew we were making the air cleaner, we were making the water cleaner, and it wasn't increasing their bills that much. They could handle it, and they saw the benefit of those investments. So 80% of our energy comes from coal, and those are clean coal plants, some of the cleanest in the country because of those investments.
And where are those located?
We have 1,200 megawatts of coal generation in New Madrid, Missouri, which is down the extreme boot hill.
Along the Mississippi River.
Along the Mississippi River. And then we have the Thomas Hill Energy Center in north central Missouri near Moberly. That's where our two large generating plants are.
But they don't burn any Missouri coal anymore, do they?
The Thomas Hill Energy Center used to burn Missouri coal, but when they passed the Clean Air Act amendments, it also forced us in the 90s to switch from Missouri coal, which was high sulfur, to low sulfur Wyoming coal.
So are we able to supply our needs from those two plants, or do we have to also buy some?
We supply all of our needs. We almost have 5,000 million watts of capacity in the state. So we have plenty of capacity right now with reserves. In case one of these plants has a maintenance problem, whatever, there's plenty of power for us to meet our members' needs.
So if we've got this good capacity, are there other sources, wind or solar? You mentioned water power, hydropower already, but what other sources are there?
What I said earlier too, when the co-ops were formed, and even today, any decisions we make on what we build to meet our members' needs has to meet that affordability test, because our consumers want affordable power. So over the years, when they build a coal plant, it has to be the most economical source of power, and has to be good for the environment. In the early, maybe 2006 timeframe, we started studying the possibility of putting wind on our system. And we worked with a gentleman that formed Wind Capital Corporation, and his goal was to build wind farms in the state of Missouri. One of the problems with Missouri is we don't have the wind they have in Kansas, Oklahoma, or Texas. But his vision was we ought to be able to do this in the state of Missouri. So we worked with him and came up with the first 3 wind farms, which was 50 megawatts, and 50 up in northwest Missouri, near Maryville, Rockport, and King City. And those wind farms came in economical if you evaluate them over a 20-year time frame. The great thing about those wind farms too was that our members liked them. The farmers liked them because they were getting leases on the towers, but also the communities liked them because now they were going to get property tax for their school districts. It was going to create jobs. And they just like economic activity in their small rural community that was hit hard by the recession. So we have about 750 megawatts of wind on the Missouri Electric Co-op system now, which is wind farms in Missouri, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Associated Electric Cooperative contracted for all that wind, and as a result, they won a Department of Energy National Wind Power Award for their leadership in that area. And the power is economical. It meets the economical test.
Well, let's go back to the coal, because that's really the crux of the issue that we're dealing with now. About, if I remember right, a year or two ago, the EPA proposed some new rules which are going to put a wrinkle in the whole plan. Can you describe a little bit how that process has worked and how those rules would impact you?
Yeah, even the proposed rule that was proposed a year ago, you even have to go back 4, 5, 6 years ago. There were special interests in this country that are concerned about climate change, and they want to reduce carbon footprint of not just utilities but other sectors in the country. And they proposed in Washington, D.C. a bill that was called Cap and Trade. And their answer to solving the environmental situation on carbon, as they saw it, was to set up a new market on Wall Street And you could continue to generate electricity from your coal plants, but you'd have to go to Wall Street and buy carbon credits. So you didn't reduce the carbon output, you just paid for paper on Wall Street, and you passed those costs on to our consumers. And they were telling us at that time the cap and trade legislation was only going to cost you 25 cents a day, postage stamp a day, so don't worry about it. Well, we didn't believe them. And our members in Missouri wanted us to do a study, so we got all the utilities together in Missouri. We did a study, and the study showed that electric rates in Missouri were going to increase by 70% by 2020. That got our attention.
Pretty scary.
Pretty scary, because we know what that 70% rate increase would have done to our co-op members out there, whether they're on fixed incomes or running a small business or they're farming, milking dairy cows or drying grain, whatever. We knew it was going to have a huge impact. So we pulled all of our co-op members together and we said, we need your help. We need you to send emails to Washington, D.C., to the Congress and ask them to keep electric rates affordable and ask them to oppose the legislation that was being proposed. And that legislation was defeated in the U.S. Senate. So we celebrated. You know, our co-op consumers weren't going to get hit 70% increase. Fast forward, EPA says, even though the Congress didn't pass this legislation, we're going to do it anyway. And they came up with the Clean Power Plan proposed rules. The initial proposed rule, as we looked at it, required Missouri to reduce our carbon by 21%. But the great news was they were going to let us use our energy efficiency and our wind farms as credit for doing the right thing and reducing carbon. So when you looked at the initial proposed rule, Missouri wasn't going to get hit as hard as other states. We still ask our members to comment and send comments to EPA. Keep our electricity affordable and reliable in Missouri. 315,000 members sent emails to EPA. We thought they're going to listen to us and Missouri's going to be okay. We saw the final rule in August 3rd. The final rule of this year. The final rule raises our reduction requirement from 21% to 37%. 75% increase in carbon reduction, and they're not going to let us use our wind farms that we built as a credit against our allowances. So as a result, Missouri's going to get hit hard. We've pulled together the entire electric utility industry again, and we're taking a look at the final rule and trying to come up with a cost. It's very difficult to do because the final rule is 1,700 pages long. It's very difficult. It's a very technical document. There's some stuff in there that the industry's never seen before. So it's going to take us a little bit of time to find out the exact cost. We don't want to tell Missourians that it's going to cost this amount if we can't defend it. But we have got the group together, and initially our estimates are it's going to cost the Missourians billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars over the next 10 to 15 years to meet these requirements. And you take those billions and billions of dollars out of the economy of the state of Missouri and put it in the monthly electric bill, and it's going to have an impact.
Even the Pope was here recently talking about climate change, and I know there's some naysayers out there, but obviously there's an attempt to reduce the carbon footprint, et cetera, be cleaner energy. Is this a workable approach to solving that problem?
Well, in some people's minds, the only solution is just shut down all coal plants in the country. They think that's a solution. The problem, if you shut down all the coal plants in Missouri, the devastation that causes to our economy is really unacceptable. And yes, the wind farms we've built, they've reduced our carbon footprint on the co-op system. The hydro we get has reduced our carbon footprint. But the problem here is there is no technology to remove carbon from coal-fired generating plants. That's commercially acceptable and economical.
You can remove the chemicals you mentioned earlier in the 90s, but the carbon itself is really hard.
There is no technology yet to do that.
I've heard talk about clean coal, and then the other side says there's no such thing as clean coal. Basically, that's what you're saying, is that it's really hard to build a coal plant that doesn't have a carbon issue.
Right. But, you know, the other issue, though, is that some people have forgotten is that we've removed 95% of all pollutants from our coal plants. That's all been removed already.
So you mentioned earlier, and I thought this is ironic, that the Congress in their wisdom said we don't want any natural gas plants. Well, now we're in a surplus of natural gas. It's the cheapest fuel out there. And new plants that are being built are probably going to be fueled by natural gas, as I understand.
Exactly.
Can we convert? Is there some way that we can say, okay, look, give us some time and we'll go to natural gas?
One of the difficulties Missouri has is we don't have these huge pipelines coming through the state. So in order to convert the existing coal plants in Missouri to combined cycle natural gas plants, there's a lot of other infrastructure that would have to be built
with that
has to be passed on in the rate base.
So are they giving you a certain amount of time to accomplish this, or are they saying this is?
They're saying that the states, and they're giving the states the ability to bring forward their own state implementation plans. And we're going to be working actively with the industry in Missouri and the Department of Natural Resources to come up with a plan that fits Missouri as best we can do it, that makes common sense. The Missouri has to submit a plan by sometime in 2016, but they have until 2018 to implement it. But that's a very quick timetable. Once the first requirement comes in for carbon reduction, that's in 2022. So from 2018, when a final plan is authorized, to 2022 is 4 years. You can't build natural gas lines, transmission lines.
Can't turn the ship around that fast.
Power plants that quick. So that's a problem. That is a problem with the plan.
So what are we looking at here? Just, do you think sharply higher costs, or can you adapt solar or wind in other places and get some credit for that and draw down the cost and the impact?
You could do some of that, but here's our dilemma. As electric co-ops in Missouri, we felt like we did the right thing, even though they didn't force us to. We did the right thing to build these wind farms. We're almost to 15% of wind power in our system. Well, your utility system can only handle so much wind. So we don't think there's a lot more wind that we can put on our system.
Because of the timing of the wind power generation and that sort of thing, is that part of the
Yeah, and the
problem?
impacts on the existing network, transmission network, and how you schedule it and that kind of stuff. The other problem you've got, though, is these existing coal plants have loans on them. And so you're paying the principal and interest on these loans, and they're still operating. They're still low-cost, highly efficient coal plants. If you shut those down, that's stranded investment that the consumers are still going to be paying for, and then you build new power plants to replace them, the consumers are going to have to pay for those new plants too.
You mentioned, I believe I heard you right earlier, that about 1.5 million consumers currently. That leaves several million, I guess probably urban customers, Kansas City, St. Louis, and so on. Are they facing the same kinds of issues with coal?
They're facing the same similar issues.
So Missouri as a whole can kind of be unified on this.
Yes, we're actually meeting with all the utilities in the state. There's Ameren out of St. Louis, but they serve a large area of the state of Missouri. Kansas City Power and Light in Kansas City, they serve a large area of the state too. And then you have a large number of municipal utilities that are owned by the cities in the state that are smaller than Ameren or Kansas City Power and Light. But Springfield has a city government-owned utility, city utilities. Sikeston has City of Sikeston. And we're meeting with all of them, and we're going to have a coordinated effort to try to deal with this. And in our case, anything we do, whether we challenge the Clean Power Plan rules in court, or as we work with DNR, Department of Natural Resources, or the rest of the industry, we're going to be fighting for the consumer and affordability, because that's our mission. That's our direction from all of our consumers, is they want somebody fighting for them on cost, affordability, and reliability, and that's us.
Not that EPA really has a reputation for reasonableness, but have you talked to them and said, look, this is crazy. You've jumped it from the proposed rule. You've jumped their requirements. We can't possibly do this without massive problems in our infrastructure. Have they shown any sign of give?
Well, I think in our case, we did those discussions with them after the proposed rule came out. In fact, you might remember the regional director of EPA in Kansas City came to State Fair last summer, and we met with him and talked to him about some of our issues on the wind, and we needed to get credit for that. And 315,000 comments went in there from rural Missourians, and it's obvious they didn't listen because they raised our reduction by 75% and took away the wind.
So is there a political solution to this? I don't want to get too heavy into partisan politics, but it sounds to me like that somebody needs to listen. Can Congress put a stop to this? Can the governor put a stop? What's the solution?
The Congress is not going to be able to come up with a solution, I don't think, because, and they've tried. There's been bills passed in the House. One bill was called the Electric Ratepayer Protection Act, and it passed the U.S. House. And what it would have done, it would have put a stay on the rules until the rules are litigated in federal court. Once the U.S. Supreme Court says this is the law of the land, then everybody can start complying. That bill hasn't been taken up in the Senate, and the president said that if it reaches his desk, he'll veto it. So there's the dilemma. That logjam in Washington, D.C. between the Congress and the president is true, and it's real.
We could talk about this quite a while longer. Obviously a complicated issue, but we're running out of time. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for tonight. I'd like to say thanks again to Barry Hart with the Missouri Association of Electric Cooperatives for taking time to visit with us. And we'd also like to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in to Show Me Ag. And we hope you'll tune in next time for another look at a topic touching rural Missouri. For everyone here at KMOS and myself, good night. We're also very interested in what you have to say. So if you have feedback you'd like to share with us, you can email us at showmeag@kmos.org or find us on Facebook.